It's time for this week's review of the latest episode of My Hero Academia. This week we're going to be looking at the episode The Lovely Lady Nagant. You know the rules, and so do I. Leave a comment down below and let me know what you thought about this week's episode. Whilst you're there, you should be able to like, favourite, subscribe, click the button, do all the YouTube stuff that YouTube wants to do, because YouTube is an increasingly scary place for small content creators. Support your local small content creator today. It will do them a power of good. Now, on to the review. And as we always do at the start of one of our reviews, we start out with the positives. And I have to say that I really did enjoy that little moment at the start of the episode where we see All Might getting jumped by the two goons and just how all of that ended up playing out. It was a fun little moment for what it was worth. Granted, the way that it was presented, it felt as though it was setting up for something a little bit more than what we ended up getting. The way which we saw those flashbacks and the way that we had All Might's internal monologue, it felt as though it was setting us up for that to be the focus of the episode. That this was going to be an episode about All Might and how he was grown to be a mentor and a father figure to Midoriya. Granted, we knew that wasn't going to be the case from the off. I mean, the moment we see the title card, or rather, the moment we knew what this week's episode was going to be called, we knew that wasn't going to be the case, but I still admit that would have been something nice to see going forward, and hell, I hope that we end up getting an episode like that, as I feel that the relationship between Midoriya and All Might has been something that's been put to one side a little bit too much recently. It's like the relationship between Miguel and Johnny Lawrence in the Cobra Kai series. That felt like it should have been the heart and soul of the show. It's only really a thing in the first season. It just kind of gets slowly pushed to one side as we get more involved in all the other shenanigans going on. But, you know, hopefully that won't be the case when it goes forward into My Hero Academia as we go forward, but we'll soon see about that. As for the action stuff itself, this isn't something I'm really going to spend much time discussing because I will be honest, I think that a lot of the action speaks for itself. It is thrilling for what it is dynamic and interesting for what it is, even though I do feel that it was a little bit too fast-paced in parts, which kind of makes me feel like an old person when I'm saying that. Oh, these action sequences, they go too fast these days, I couldn't tell what was happening at any moment. That wasn't the case for me, but it just felt as though certain sequences could have been built out a little bit more, but given who was fighting who, you can't really build that out. Lady Nagant is a long-range fighter, and in the moment that Midoriya was going to close the gap, you always knew this was going to be over in a matter of seconds, so you just got to try and draw it out as much as you can do, but for what it is, it does it well. The only thing that really sticks out to me, and I'm not going to put this in the negatives, I'm just going to say it here and now, is that the whole thing about Midoriya going a level beyond, as he did, and using all these quirks at the same time, or many of them at the same time, or in quick succession. That feels like, I don't know how to say it, but it feels like something that's happened a little bit too soon, relatively speaking. I think that could have been left out a little bit longer. Maybe that should have been the big thing that he did at the end of this season, as like a big tease and a final cap to everything, rather than something that's 4 episodes out from the end of it all. But that's a minor gripe from me. As I've said in the past, whilst I have come around to anime in many regards, there are still certain tropes of it that do stick in the back of my throat a little bit, and they always say you going a level beyond the level beyond is something that always just kind of makes my bones itch in a way. But that's a discussion for a whole other time. I think that whilst we're here, you know, we have to get into it, which is discuss the meat of the episode, or at least what I feel is the meat of the episode, which is the backstory of Lady Nagant. Is the most dramatically interesting stuff that we have therein, and is the most developed and, again, the most interesting stuff that we have here. I feel that, though, if I'm going to slot in a slight negative, I feel that it could have been its own episode. Like, you have this whole sequence, this whole meeting with Lady Nagant being a 3-episode thing, the previous episode being one, then you have an episode centered around her, then you have the episode where they just duke it out and just get what effectively we got in the second half of the episode, but that's a whole other discussion. I feel that it was good for what it was and decently paced, though I do feel that a lot of it was just far too condensed for my liking. I do feel that, however, this hyper-condension that we got did lead us into some interesting moments. Like, we see those flashes of her when she's a kid, and just the juxtaposition between her then and now, and when she ended up doing what she did. It creates this nice little trinity of just her progression through her hero career, and you're seeing how her point of view and expression on life has gone from the bright-eyed, optimistic kid that wants to change the world and save the day to the cynical murderer for hire, and then eventually the convict trying to make something out of themselves. Of course, to say that she's a gun for hire is incorrect. She was essentially a cleaner for Hero Society. She was working for I forget the exact official title of it, but she's working for the Hero Society people, just getting rid of anyone who might be an issue for wider society, and I think that is a brilliant idea. A terribly dark one, but it's still a fantastic one. Her job is to take down terrorists, vigilantes, and otherwise problematic people. It is a dark but interesting idea, especially given some of the implications of some of the stuff that we end up seeing, and is suggested to us that she's offing people without them necessarily doing anything, or at least she's offing them for very vague, well, they might be a problem reasons, and all of that just leads into this feeling that I often have with My Hero Academia, which is, yeah, it's a great world to see in fiction, but it's not the kind of world that I necessarily want to live in. You know, you can have your superhero stuff. I'm quite happy to sit here in front of my very cheap microphone talking about everything. I don't want to live in that world. But still, I feel that as good as all that stuff was, we did need a fair bit of exposition to get to it, which is where this feeling of hypercondensation comes into it. I feel that some of this stuff needed time to really air out and have time to expand for us to understand it a little bit more. Now, granted, I will put my hands up and say that I was getting a lot of messages from work while this episode was going out, so I had a lot of bleeps and bloops in the background distracting me, so it hasn't upset my enjoyment of the episode, it hasn't upset my understanding of it, but it still is something that might have got in the way of certain aspects of it, but I like to think I've got a good grasp on it. With that said, I do feel that Lady Nagant's heel turn into villainy was well put together, though I do feel that it lacks the kind of gut punch that other similar backstories has had. It's better than what we had with Mr. Compress, but I think that it lacks the punch in the way that Twice's turn did, or Gentle Criminal's turn did. I feel that, and I'm always reluctant to do a this is how I would have done it thing, but I feel that with the moment where she's executing the terrorists, I think there should have been more of a build up with that. She learns, oh, these guys they're going to do something terrible. We need to stop them now for the sake of hero kind. They're going to ruin everything, could destroy, kill hundreds of millions of people. So she goes in, does her thing. Then after the fact, we end up learning that they're just a protest group. They were just going to shut down a road. They were going to glue themselves to a fence or something, and they were taken out, even though at most they've only would have been a nuisance. I think that something like that would have hit a bit more of a punch to it, and maybe would have added something else to it, though I think that it's not necessarily this would have improved it, this is just a how it would have been different kind of a thing. I don't think my ideas would have been better, they just would have been different. But still, even with all that said, what we end up getting within all of that is still great drama. It's well produced, well written, and well performed. As a slight side note, I think that her whole explosion moment is a double bluff on All For One's part. She is, knowingly or not, leading them into a trap, I feel, and that her explosion just makes it more likely that the heroes are going to end up going there because they have more of an emotional investment to do so. They're doing this to avenge her, even though All For One was going to lead them into that trap one way or the other, so, you know, that's just my feeling, that's just my theory on the matter. And just as a final wrap-up thing, the stuff with Overhaul, good, but I think that we need more of it. I think that it needs to be developed some more. I think that we will end up seeing more of him and what's going on with him in the next few episodes or so. But what we get here and now, he just seems to just be floating about and not contributing quite as much as I would like him to be. Though with that said, in previous editions I have said I kind of would have liked his appearance during the Tartarus escape to just have been effectively a walk-on cameo. I think that would have been just about enough, as what we end up getting here is setting us up for stuff which may or may not actually be dramatically significant, or at least dramatically interesting enough to justify him just being back, but we'll soon see how that goes. With all that said, however, let's get us into the negatives, and aside from the few nitpicky points I've already mentioned in the positives, there aren't that many, honestly. The only issues that I have with pacing, which is the sense that I feel that some sequences needed tweaking, some areas needed going a little bit quickly, or rather a little bit faster, or some parts needed to go slower. I think that at the end of the day, this is just another case of an episode which maybe could have been split into 2 episodes. Just make this into a 3-parter. First part is what we had last week. This week could have been more developing the backstory on Lady Nagant, and then the final part would have been them coming together, fighting, and then Lady Nagant exploding as she did towards the end of this episode. But different strokes for different folks. I still think that what we got this week was fantastic for what it was, so I can't criticise it overly heavily. The only area that I think was just outright naff was that 3D sequence that we got towards the start of the episode. The integration of 3D in animation in 2D animation is always odd to me. Like, I think that, certainly in the case of anime, I think it sticks out like a sore thumb, more so than it does oftentimes in Western animation. As this week, I think one of my major issues with it was how they were trying to match the frame rate of the hand-drawn animation, which is something I always hate when I see it being done. It just looks really bad to me. It looks jittery. And I know that they wanted to do it to match the hand-drawn stuff, to make it seem a little bit more seamless, but it never works. Not for me. It always looks conspicuous. I understand that given the animation deadlines, they can't really do something quite this ornate in hand-drawn animation, not without spending a small fortune in order to do it, but even still, I find the whole jittery thing that we're seeing in a lot of 3D animation now, this attempt to evoke the feeling of hand-drawn animation, it just looks weird, and it looks even weirder when it's done in juxtaposition with actual hand-drawn animation. It just looks odd to me. I'm sorry to say that. And I suppose the counterpoint is that if they did do it in a higher frame rate, it would look even more conspicuous. It would just end up looking like something out of a video game. I understand that, but that's a different show. It's a different folks thing, and a whole other discussion for a whole other video. But still, as we get into the overview, I think the episode itself was good. I think it was decent. I think the drama and the backstory stuff that we got with Lady Nagant was great. I do feel, however, it needed to be better delivered. I think that certain aspects of it just needed time to breathe. We learnt a lot of information in a very short period of time, which, for stuff as complex as this, just need a little more time to it. But I do like the fact that it helps us learn more about the world. It is some decent world building for what it is, and as I said previously, it's another reason as to why I don't think I'd necessarily want to live in the My Hero Academia world. Still, as a whole entity, really solid episode. I'm interested to see where this all goes going forward. With all that said and done, let us get into Comment Corner! Now it's time for Comment Corner, and we kick off with Big X1, who says, I like this week's episode. It was great to see Deco doing more hero stuff and being the focus, like you say. I'm interested to see how this new villain will get on. I think that All For One must have given her more quirks than just the airwalking one, otherwise it might become too much of a curb stomp. Thank you for the comment, and as I say in my reply, I don't think that it really was going to be as much of a curb stomp as maybe some people were expecting it to be. Of course, in hindsight, even then, this wasn't really a curb stomp. It required Midoriya to just think probably more on his feet than he has done in a very long time, and take a level of risk that he hasn't really done in, I was going to say not for a very long time, but bearing in mind what happened in the first half of this season, at least not for a good 6 or 7 episodes at least. I think that, again, in hindsight and looking back at what I wrote last week, Lady Nagant wasn't going to be the kind of pushover that I think some people thought she was going to be. In last week's episode, they go to great lengths to talk about how great of a markswoman that she is, how great her aim and such is, so even without the benefit of a quirk, she was always going to be a problem. Add in her quirk, as well as the extra quirk that she ended up getting from All For One, again, that just adds an extra level of dynamism, which made it difficult for Midoriya to really deal with. And turns out, I guess she did have another quirk, even if she didn't knowingly know she had it. So, we'll see how all this goes. Maybe she does have other quirks, and maybe my theory about a double bluff is real. Again, knowingly or not, I think that she's being used as bait, but we'll see how all that goes. Next up, it's Ritsuka Gudako Fujimaru, apologies for getting the name wrong, but they say, honestly, I've said this before, but Lady Nagant is my favourite villain, mainly because she's not really villain. You'll see next week when you eat your words for calling her backstory boring, which I'm really looking forward to, because she's my favourite, it's my most favourite fight in the entire series. I'll explain further next week. Also, something that was cut for some odd reason this week was the reveal of the first one for all users' name. Yoichi Shigaraki. Remember that Shigaraki isn't Tomura's real name. His real name is Tenko Shimura. My Hero Academia places a lot of emphasis on the persona of one's personal identity separated from the hero/villain identity. Like in Season 3, the hero All Might died, but the person Toshinori Yagi lived on. Thank you for the comment, and I'm not sure if I actually said that last week I found her backstory boring, though with that said I'd have to look back on it, because what I do remember saying is I was cautious about how they were going to handle her backstory because, as you are well aware, and as other people I think need to be informed if they're watching my videos for the first time, is that I don't read the manga, so any kind of idea as to what I know coming up next is either stuff that was being leaked to me, and it's stuff that I'm still angry about getting leaked to me, or it's stuff that I've just tried to put together in the back of my head. And with that in mind, I didn't know what her backstories were going to end up being, as we learned this week. And I was just kind of apprehensive as to how they'd deal with her heel turn, because that's ultimately what her turn into villainy was. What we're going to get in this week is, if I did say it was boring, I'm quite happy to eat my words, because this week we get something that is brilliantly interesting and is something that just is something I'll be thinking about for the next few days or so, just how horrific this ends up making the My Hero Academia world feels even more. And a thanks for the heads up on the name matter, as I've just mentioned, I'm not someone who's read the manga, so I don't know what has or has not been adapted for it. I have to say that since coming back into getting interested in anime, I've noticed that there is a greater emphasis on the meanings of names, more so than a lot with Western storytelling. And this goes beyond just the literal meaning of them. This isn't to say that it isn't a factor within Western stories, it just isn't to the same extent, certainly not to the same extent as far as mainstream pop superhero stories is concerned. I'll be interested to see exactly how the naming stuff ends up developing itself going forward, because we did know, I think, ahead of time that the original user of One for All was the younger brother of All for One. So we'll actually see exactly the significance of the name going forward. But still, thank you all for your comments. And if you want to leave a comment down below, you can do so by just going down below, leave me a comment, let me know what you thought about this week's episode of My Hero Academia. Whilst you're there, be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTube stuff that YouTube wants to do, because YouTube is green space. I tried to say that very quickly as a quirky, fun thing, but I just made a tit of myself. So with that said and done, let's just wrap this all up and say thank you for watching, and see you next time. Goodbye!
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!